The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
A very good morning to you with the news at this time. I am Tiana Jordan. The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. And now to begin the news, here is a look at the leads. The Public Accounts Committee that scrutinizes government spending heard that staff shortages resulted in breaches at the ministry's drug storage bond. A 16-year-old suspected bandit has been shot dead. The Pan American Health Organization is reporting a decline in COVID cases across the Americas and the Caribbean as more people are vaccinated. The ex-husband of a West Malindan businesswoman has been arrested for attempting to take her life Tuesday night at her business place. A former head of the Special Organized Crime Unit is wanted by police. In regional news, the CCJ for 2 consecutive days heard submissions in the Belize Common External Tariff case brought against Trinidad and Tobago. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, which results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
And now the news in detail. The Bipartisan Public Accounts Committee, PAC, of the National Assembly that scrutinizes government spending has heard that staff shortages have resulted in breaches at the ministry's drug storage bond. The former Permanent Secretary, PS, Trevor Thomas, was called upon to produce proof that he requested staff. The Auditor General's report on the Ministry Materials Management Department identified breaches of poorly kept records and, in other cases, no updated bin cards to log specific drugs and poor inventory of stock leaving and entering the bond. Government member of the PAC, Juan Edgel, sought to ascertain the reasons for the breaches, which continued from prior to 2017.
Why weren't staff employed to ensure that these sightings didn't reoccur when commitments were made to PAC that they would be remedied? What happened in 2016 that prevented staff, especially in light of the fact that in 2016, this issue was a big issue about stock levels, inventories, bin cards. We went through the full 9 yards in that discussion, Mr. Chair, you will recall.
The former PS, Trevor Thomas, who is being cited for the breaches and is still employed at the Health Ministry, told the PAC that updating records is an ongoing challenge.
Requests for filling of positions were made. There are 2 things. One, you can get permission to fill a position, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will get the staff to fill the position, especially if it's at a lower level. Filling positions in other departments has always been a challenge. High attrition rates and so on. More persons up at the clerical level to work in accounts or parcel or so on. And this is no attempt to make an excuse. I think this is important, but it has been an ongoing challenge to update inventories and have staff to do it. But requests have been made to fill positions from time to time.
The BAC has given Mr. Thomas 1 week to produce evidence of those requests before he is no longer cited for those breaches.
The former PS is indicating basically that he was unable to carry out his functions under Section 39 of the Stores Regulations of 1993 because he did not have adequate staff.
Yes, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you are being cited for a breach because you didn't have the staff to help you to carry out your function.
Correct.
Could you provide PAC with evidence by way of letter where you wrote for the filling of these vacancies and responses as it relates? Because as it is right now, you're in the hot seat because you couldn't do your work as a PS and we had breaches, we had excesses, we had shortages.
The APNU plus AFC administration in 2017 had been forced to sole source millions of dollars in emergency medical drugs when it had been discovered that critical drugs had been in short supply for the country's hospitals and health centers. A 16-year-old boy who was part of a group of males who allegedly robbed a housewife of her gold chain at the Starbrook Market Square was Wednesday shot dead. Police say Sidel Bourne of Agricola East Bank, Demerara, was shot by a plainclothes policeman who was the woman's husband. Investigators were informed that the plainclothes policeman opened fire with his service pistol after he heard one of the teenager's accomplices urging Bourne to stab the woman. Police said that at about 2:20 on Wednesday afternoon, the policeman and his wife, who was wearing a gold chain, were attacked by Bourne, who was armed with a knife, and 2 other males. Bourne was pronounced dead on arrival at the Georgetown Public Hospital. The Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, is reporting a decline in COVID cases across the Americas and the Caribbean as more people are vaccinated. Assistant Director of PAHO, Dr. Harbus Barbosa, says while reported cases of new infections continue, there has been a significant decline across all regions.
Over the last week, the region of the Americas reported more than 745,020 new cases, new COVID-19 infections, and just over 18,000 COVID-related deaths. This is the 8th consecutive week that overall cases have declined in the region. In North America, all 3 countries reported drops in weekly cases and deaths, and there has been a notable decline in hospitalizations in the United States and Canada. There have been similar declines across most countries in Central America. After weeks of a persistent outbreak in Belize, I am pleased to report a nearly 20% decrease in cases and a 60% decrease in deaths.
New infections and deaths reported from all regions are related to those persons being unvaccinated. Dr. Barbosa says, except for 3 Caribbean states experiencing a surge, generally, COVID deaths have leveled and the countries should persist with their vaccination efforts.
A very high percentage of those hospitalized have not been immunized against the virus. Consistent with the other parts of the region, cases and deaths are trending downwards or remaining stable throughout much of the Caribbean. However, Barbados continues to report its highest number of COVID-related infections and deaths since the start of the pandemic, and there are concerning shortages of hospital capacity in the Dominican Republic and Trinidad and Tobago. The progress in our region is not a reason to become complacent or discontinue the public health measures that help keep us safe. Quite the opposite. The decline in cases and deaths shows that our approach is working, and it is critical for all of us to stay the course until everyone is vaccinated and protected from the virus.
The PAHO Assistant Director says most of the countries in the Americas and the Caribbean are on target with the PAHO vaccination goals. The COVID death toll has moved upward to 928, with the deaths of 2 elderly persons. They are an 83-year-old man who was fully vaccinated and an 80-year-old woman who was not vaccinated. The Health Ministry says it has recorded 81 new COVID infections in the last 24 hours. The number of active cases now stands at 2,520. Of that number, 2,455 who tested positive are instructed to isolate themselves at home, while another 47 are hospitalized and 18 persons are receiving care in the COVID intensive care unit. The ministry says Guyana now has 247,822 adults and 18,521 children between the ages of 12 to 17 years old who are fully vaccinated. There are 383,943 adults and 27,587 children between the 12 to 17 age group that are partially vaccinated. The ex-husband of a Westmoreland businesswoman has been arrested for attempting to take her life Tuesday night at her business place. Investigators relate that the assailant first threatened the woman to kill her and her male friend around 5 p.m. on Tuesday. The man returned around 7:30 p.m. armed with a handgun and entered the shop that the 36-year-old woman operates. He allegedly fired at her, hitting her in the abdomen. He then escaped the scene of the shooting. The woman managed to make a phone call to her church members, who took her to the Linden Hospital complex, where she was admitted and remains a patient. Police subsequently arrested the suspect at Canvas City, and he was taken to the Mackenzie police station, where he was told of the allegation and cautioned. He opted to remain silent. He was placed in custody pending investigations. The former head of the Special Organized Crime Unit, SOCU, Sidney James, is wanted by the police. The wanted bulletin by the police states that the former Deputy Commissioner of Police is wanted for a series of reports of obtaining money by false pretense and fraud. The former head of SOCU was instrumental in the unit investigating Bart Jagdeo, now Vice President, Irfan Ali, now President, and former senior officials of the National Industrial and Commercial Investments Limited. And now in regional news. Belize has accused Trinidad and Tobago of failing to apply the Common External Tariff (CET) tax on brown sugar imported from outside the region from November 2018 to June 2020. Over 2 days, the Caribbean Court of Justice (CCJ) heard complaint by Belize claiming Trinidad and Tobago breached the revised Treaty of Jaguaramas by failing to apply the CET of 40% on imports of brown sugar from Guatemala and Honduras. The Central American country has alleged that because of the treaty violation, Belize Sugar Industries Limited, BSI, and Santander Sugar were losing sales to these countries. It was also alleged that the CARICOM Secretariat had failed to ensure Trinidad and Tobago imposed the CET. Belize is seeking a ruling from the CCJ that requires the full application of the 40% CET on brown sugar imported from non-CARICOM sources. In its lawsuit, Belize contended it had evidence to demonstrate that between November 2018 and June 2020, brown sugar produced outside the Caribbean region entered the market without the CET being imposed. On Tuesday, 3 of that country's witnesses were grilled by the attorney representing the government. Those questioned, were Andy Sutherland, Acting Director General of the Directorate General for Foreign Trade of Belize, and 2 executives from the ASR Group, the world's largest refiner and marketer of cane sugar, Rui Martinez and Mark Lachat. The CET is a single tariff rate agreed to by all members of CARICOM on imports of the product from outside the Caribbean community. Goods imported from third countries are subject to duties listed in the CET, but goods imported from CARICOM countries certified to be of CARICOM origin do not generally attract these import duties. They enjoy duty-free status. The matter has been adjourned to Wednesday, when attorneys for Belize and the Trinidad and Tobago government will advance their submissions. Presiding over the matter are CCJ President Justice Adrian Saunders and Justices Jacob Witt, Winston Anderson, Maureen Rajnath Lee, Dennis Barrow, Andrew Burgess, and Peter Jamadar. The Antiguan Observer News reported that ties between Antigua and Barbuda and the United Arab Emirates (UAE) have been strengthened as the Twin Islands sets up office in the Middle Eastern country, which now provides opportunities for trade and tourism. Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador, Gilbert Bustani, now resident ambassador, says the Caribbean country is setting up an embassy in the UAE and a trade office in Dubai to facilitate collaboration between the 2 states. Ambassador Bustani says the government's focus will be placed on integrating youth as a means of securing the future. The ambassador says the future is poised to be successful given the similarities between both territories and the ambitions of Antigua and Barbuda to be a dominant force in the Caribbean. Ambassador Bustani is part of Antigua and Barbuda's delegation to Expo 2020 Dubai, which is seeking to promote the country's culture and secure investment to improve its economic conditions. Barbados's opposition leader, Bishop Joseph Atherley, is crying shame on the lack of provision made for his office. Atherley made his displeasure known to lawmakers on the government side as they met to approve over $95.9 million from the Consolidated Fund to supplement the 2021 to 2022 estimates. Atherley, who broke away from the governing Barbados Labour Party shortly after the general election in May of 2018 to form his opposition party, says he was convinced only lip service is given to his office. He lamented the absence of adequate staff while insisting that the parliament should financially support the office of the opposition with cost for retaining legal fees in certain circumstances. He was addressing lawmakers in Parliament on Tuesday as the Standing Finance Committee on Supplementary Estimates discussed the almost $48 million earmarked for various government ministries. Atherley says his office has made a formal request of the Management Commission of Parliament for a research officer, but more than a year later, the matter had not been addressed, leaving him to do all the necessary research himself. The opposition leader further bemoaned the staffing levels of the office, suggesting that there was need for more personnel and allowance for some staff. And now for the international news, the latest coming from the BBC World Service.
Don't let the fear of contracting the...
Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. Britain says more than 40 countries have promised to phase out coal power, but they don't include the biggest polluters like China, the US, Australia and India. The pledge also includes ending support for new plants. Our environment analyst Roger Harrabin reports.
The members of this deal have pledged to accelerate the phase-out of coal and increase clean power generation instead. Rich nations which signed up will get rid of coal power this decade. Developing countries will follow next decade. The government's promised to look after mining communities. 18 countries are committing for the first time, including significant emerging economies of Poland, Vietnam and Chile. The USA and China, big coal users, have not signed up, but the UK government says it's still a turning point in the transition towards global clean energy.
New international research says China now accounts for almost a third of the world's carbon emissions. The latest Global Carbon Budget report also says global emissions have bounced back almost completely this year to the levels seen before the pandemic, which saw a dip because of lockdowns. The report's lead researcher, Professor Pierre Friedlingstein, told the BBC China was a huge contributor to global emissions as its economy recovered from the pandemic.
Chinese emissions didn't decline in 2020. They didn't grow as fast as they used to, but the growth of Chinese emissions was still positive. And in 2021, the Chinese emissions are growing a bit faster. Essentially going back on the track they used to be before the pandemic.
A US envoy is due in Addis Ababa for talks with the Ethiopian government on the escalating crisis in the country. Jeffrey Feltman's visit comes as Tigrayan rebels, who began their campaign against the government a year ago, continue their advance south. They say the latest town they've taken is Kamisa, just over 300 kilometres from the capital. A US State Department spokesman, Ned Price, said the situation was worrying.
We are gravely concerned by the escalating violence, by the expansion of the fighting that we've seen in northern Ethiopia and in regions throughout the country. We are concerned with the growing risk to the unity and the integrity of the Ethiopian state.
The chief financial officer of Mitel, a military-owned telecommunications firm in Myanmar, has been shot dead outside his home in Yangon. Thein Aung's wife was also wounded in the attack. Militias fighting Myanmar's military government are thought to have destroyed more than 80 telecommunications towers owned by Mitel in recent months. The US Democrats have retained the governorship of New Jersey, a rare victory on an otherwise bleak polling day. But it was a narrow one. Phil Murphy beat off the challenge from the Republican Jack Ciattarelli by just 1 percentage point. Mr. Murphy is the first Democratic governor for 4 decades to win re-election in New Jersey. World News from the BBC. The French maritime authorities say more than 400 migrants were rescued attempting to cross the Channel to Britain from Tuesday night into Wednesday. One migrant who was found unconscious subsequently died, and another person is missing. Officials warned of the dangers of the crossing, which is subject to high winds. The death toll in the Lagos building collapse has risen to 36. The 21-storey building under construction in Nigeria's commercial capital came crashing down on Monday, but no one has been found alive since Tuesday. From Lagos, Miney Jones reports.
On the 4th day of the rescue operation, the crowd around the site has dwindled. Excavating machines plough through the rubble, moving it to the side. Many family members are frustrated at the rescue effort. They say the authorities were too slow to respond and don't seem to be looking for survivors. Support desks for relatives of the missing were only set up 48 hours after the incident. Some relatives complained it was too little too late. The governor of Lagos State says the rescue operation is ongoing and that an independent panel has been set up to investigate the cause of the collapse.
Australian police have charged a 36-year-old man with the abduction of a 4-year-old girl whose disappearance from a campsite caused a national outcry. Terence Darrell Kelly did not apply for bail. Cleo Smith was found playing with dolls inside a locked house 100 kilometres from the campsite, 18 days after she went missing. Human Rights Watch says that Taliban rules that prevent most women from doing aid work have worsened Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis. The campaign group said that in more than half the country's 34 provinces, the militants were either banning female aid workers outright, severely limiting the type of work they could do, or forcing them to have a related male chaperone for work in the field, a condition often impossible to fulfil. BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now to end the news, here is a recap of the leads. The Public Accounts Committee that scrutinizes government spending heard that staff shortages resulted in breaches at the ministry's drug storage bond. A 16-year-old suspected bandit has been shot dead. The Pan American Health Organization is reporting a decline in COVID cases across the Americas and the Caribbean as more people are vaccinated. A former head of the Special Organized Crime Unit is wanted by the police. And in regional news, the CCJ for 2 consecutive days heard submissions in the Belize Common External Tariff case brought against Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.